Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering an entire town slaughtered. The bodies still lying where they fell, the gold untouched, and absolutely nobody willing to explain what happened. That is not a horror movie. That actually happened. History loves pretending it is organized dates, kings, wars, neat little museum labels. But beneath that polished surface is a basement full of corpses, vanished diseases, impossible monuments, and questions science still cannot answer without nervously clearing its throat. Today, we are diving into 4 of the most disturbing, crazy historical facts ever uncovered. A massacre where the killers ignored the treasure, a sickness that could erase a healthy person in less than a day, a 12,000-year-old structure deliberately buried by its own builders, and a frozen lake packed with skeletons from different centuries and different parts of the world. This is weird history at its absolute darkest. But stay until the end, because the final mystery suggests that hundreds of people may have traveled thousands of miles to the same deadly location, centuries apart, without knowing they were walking into a graveyard. Let us begin in Sweden, where the scenery is beautiful, the winters are brutal, and one ancient community apparently experienced the worst neighborhood dispute in human history. Sometime between the years 450 and 550 of the Common Era, Sandby Borg stood on the island of Öland. It was a circular fortified settlement containing dozens of stone houses, livestock, families, imported jewelry, Roman coins, and enough wealth to suggest that the residents were doing pretty well for themselves. Then, one day, somebody arrived and turned the entire place into a crime scene. Archaeologists began seriously investigating the fort after surveys revealed evidence of looting and buried valuables. They probably expected pottery, coins, maybe the ancient Swedish equivalent of someone losing their keys. Instead, they found bodies. Inside the houses, people had been struck down and left exactly where they fell. Animals were killed alongside them. Infants were among the dead. Some buildings were later burned, but the victims were never given proper burials. One man appears to have been attacked outside in the street. Injured, but still alive, he ran into a nearby house, probably thinking thick stone walls would offer protection. They did not. The attackers followed him inside and delivered a fatal blow to the back of his head. That detail matters because many victims seem to have been struck from behind. There were almost no defensive wounds and little evidence of organized resistance. This was not two armies dramatically charging at each other while someone played inspirational battle music. This was fast, sudden, and terrifyingly one-sided. Only roughly 1/10 of Sandby Borg has been excavated, yet archaeologists have already uncovered at least 26 bodies. With around 50 houses still largely unexplored, the total number of victims may have been far higher, possibly hundreds. And this is where the story becomes one of the strangest examples of weird history. The killers left behind valuable objects. Gold jewelry remained hidden inside houses. Silver items and Roman coins were not collected. If robbery was the motive, the attackers were historically bad at their job. Should we take the gold? No, absolutely not. What about the silver? Leave it. So what exactly are we stealing? The archaeologists' peace of mind. The surviving evidence suggests that the attackers did not simply want the residents dead. They may have wanted the settlement erased, humiliated, or transformed into a warning. Archaeologists know that women lived at Sandby Borg, yet only one confirmed female skeleton has been identified. Some researchers have proposed that women may have been taken captive, but that creates another uncomfortable question. If the attackers had enough control to select captives, why were so many men caught completely off guard? After the massacre, nobody returned to bury the dead. Nobody rebuilt the houses. Nobody moved into the fort. For more than 1,500 years, Sandby Borg remained abandoned, as though everyone nearby understood that the place was forbidden. The bodies stayed inside the ruined homes, and the treasure remained where its owners had hidden it. There are no surviving records naming the attackers. Some historians suspect a political conflict between rival groups on the island. The assault appears to have... They may have been neighbors. That possibility turns these crazy historical facts into something even darker. This was not necessarily an invasion by mysterious strangers. It may have been a carefully planned act of local revenge, carried out by people who knew exactly whom they were killing and exactly what message they wanted to leave behind. Sandby Borg was not forgotten because nobody knew what happened. It may have been abandoned because everyone nearby knew perfectly well. Now let us leave the silent ruins of Sweden and travel to England, where history decided that wars, executions, rotten teeth, and indoor plumbing disasters were apparently not enough suffering for one population. In the year 1485, a mysterious illness appeared in England with the subtlety of a brick through a stained glass window. It became known as the English sweating sickness. and it did not behave like a normal epidemic. It arrived suddenly, spread with terrifying speed, killed people within hours, vanished for years, and then returned whenever everyone had finally started sleeping normally again. The illness struck in 5 major waves between the years 1485 and 1551. Victims often began with an intense and unexplained feeling of fear. Not ordinary fear, like realizing you left your oven on. This was overwhelming dread, followed by violent chills, headaches, pain in the back and limbs, dizziness, exhaustion, and then relentless sweating. Once the sweating began, the situation could deteriorate brutally fast. A healthy person might eat breakfast, complain of feeling cold before lunch, start pouring sweat by the afternoon, and be dead before anyone had time to blame the French. Some estimates suggest the mortality rate may have reached around 1/2 in certain outbreaks. Many victims died within a single day. The speed was so horrifying that families sometimes watched several relatives fall ill one after another, with almost no time to prepare, escape, or understand what was happening. Naturally, people turned to doctors. This was a bold decision. Medical knowledge in Tudor England still leaned heavily on the idea that the human body contained 4 fluids that needed to remain in balance. If you were sick, a doctor might recommend bloodletting, herbal mixtures, heavy blankets, or some other procedure that made death feel less like an accident and more like a scheduled appointment. Doctor, I am sweating, shaking, and losing consciousness. Interesting. Have you considered losing some blood? I already feel weak. Perfect. The treatment is working. One physician, John Caius, later wrote a detailed account of the disease after witnessing an outbreak in the year 1551. He advised patients to remain still, avoid food, avoid drink, and stay covered while sweating. The problem was that extreme heat and dehydration may have made some patients even worse. Tudor medicine had once again entered the room, looked directly at the fire, and recommended adding more wood. The disease also behaved strangely in terms of whom it attacked. It appeared to strike wealthy people, members of the clergy, and residents of large households more often than the desperately poor. That was unusual because most historical epidemics treated poverty like an all-you-can-eat buffet. One possible explanation is that wealthy homes, monasteries, and estates stored large quantities of grain and food. Those supplies attracted rodents, and rodents brought fleas, droppings, and whatever microscopic nightmare might have caused the sickness. The rich may have enjoyed better furniture, larger meals, and private rooms, only to discover that their luxury pantry came with complementary biological warfare. The first major outbreak spread through England soon after Henry Tudor defeated Richard III and became King Henry VII. Because the sickness appeared around the arrival of Henry's forces, some people suspected that his soldiers had brought it with them. Nothing says welcome to your new dynasty quite like a mysterious disease killing thousands of your subjects. Later waves struck in the years 1508, 1517, 1528, and 1551. The outbreak of 1528 spread beyond England into parts of mainland Europe, including German territories and Scandinavia. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the sweating sickness vanished. After the year 1551, there were no confirmed major outbreaks ever again. Modern researchers have suggested several possible causes. One theory proposes an early form of hantavirus, which can spread through contact with infected rodents. Other researchers have considered influenza, bacterial infection, or an unknown virus that later disappeared or changed into something less recognizable. But there is no confirmed answer. No preserved sample exists for modern testing. No single theory explains every symptom, every outbreak, and every strange pattern. The disease entered history, killed tens of thousands of people, confused every doctor who encountered it, and then apparently retired without leaving a forwarding address. That actually happened. And it remains one of the most unsettling examples of weird history because humanity never defeated the sweating sickness. We did not invent a cure, develop a vaccine, or uncover its cause. It simply stopped coming back. For once, the medical strategy of doing almost nothing somehow achieved the best possible result. Now let us travel from plague-ridden England to southeastern Turkey, where archaeologists discovered something that made the traditional story of human civilization fall down a flight of stairs. For a long time, the standard explanation of early history was simple. Humans wandered around hunting animals and collecting plants, then somebody discovered farming. People settled into villages, and only after creating stable communities did they begin building temples, organizing large workforces, and arguing about whose turn it was to pay taxes. It was a clean timeline. Then Göbekli Tepe showed up and ruined everything. The site is around 12,000 years old, meaning it was constructed thousands of years before Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids. At that time, the people living in the region were still hunter-gatherers. They had no writing system, no metal tools, no construction cranes, and presumably no project manager sending passive-aggressive messages about missed deadlines. Yet, they somehow built a massive ceremonial complex. Göbekli Tepe contains at least 20 large circular enclosures made from enormous limestone pillars. Many of the pillars are shaped like the letter T. Some rise roughly 6 meters high and weigh several dozen tons, with the largest approaching 50 tons. Moving one of these stones without modern machinery would be difficult today. Moving it while wearing animal skins, carrying stone tools, and surviving on whatever you manage to chase through the forest sounds like a team-building exercise designed by Satan. The pillars are also covered with detailed carvings of snakes, foxes, wild boars, birds, insects, and other animals. Some include arms, hands, belts, and clothing, suggesting the pillars may represent stylized human figures. So these were not random rocks dragged into a circle because prehistoric people were bored. The builders had a plan, a symbolic system, and enough organized labor to quarry, carve, transport, and raise gigantic stones. Should we invent farming first? No. Should we at least build permanent houses? Also no. Then what are we doing? Constructing a giant stone complex for reasons nobody will understand for 12,000 years. Excellent priorities. For years, Göbekli Tepe was described as the world's first known temple. The idea was revolutionary because it suggested organized religion may have helped create settled civilization, rather than appearing after farming communities were already established. In other words, people may not have started farming and then built temples. They may have gathered to build temples, realized feeding hundreds of workers was a logistical nightmare, and then invented agriculture because nobody wanted to keep hunting lunch every afternoon. More recent discoveries have complicated that interpretation. Archaeologists have found domestic buildings, tools, food preparation areas, and evidence suggesting people may have lived at or near the site. Göbekli Tepe may not have been only a temple. It could have been a settlement, a gathering place, a ritual center, or some combination of all three. That is how archaeology works. You spend decades developing one explanation, find a broken bowl, and suddenly your entire theory needs therapy. But the strangest part is not merely that Göbekli Tepe was built, it is what happened afterward. Around 8,000 before the Common Era, parts of the complex were deliberately filled with stone, soil, animal bones, and debris. The enclosures were not simply abandoned and slowly covered by nature, people appear to have intentionally buried them. Imagine spending generations quarrying giant limestone pillars, carving hundreds of animals, organizing enormous work crews, and constructing one of the most impressive structures on Earth. Then somebody says, "Great work, everyone." Now, bury the whole thing. Nobody knows exactly why. Perhaps the people's beliefs changed. Perhaps the site was ritually closed. Perhaps new communities replaced the old ones. Or perhaps ancient humanity had already invented the timeless tradition of completing an expensive public project and immediately making it unusable. Göbekli Tepe is one of the greatest crazy historical facts because it forces us to reconsider what prehistoric humans were capable of. These people were not confused cave dwellers waiting for civilization to begin. They could organize labor, create symbolic art, plan monumental architecture, and reshape their landscape on an enormous scale. The mystery is not whether they were intelligent enough to build it. The evidence makes that painfully clear. The mystery is why they built it, what happened there, and why their descendants decided the best way to preserve the achievement was to hide it beneath a mountain of dirt. That actually happened, and it remains one of the most important discoveries in weird history because Göbekli Tepe did not merely add a new chapter to the story of civilization. It reached into the earlier chapters, crossed out the old explanation, and wrote, "You have no idea what these people were doing. Now let us climb high into the Himalayas," because apparently history was not satisfied with leaving mysteries in ruined forts and buried temples. It also decided to scatter hundreds of human skeletons around a frozen lake more than 16,000 feet above sea level. Roopkund Lake sits in a remote part of northern India, surrounded by steep mountains, snow, and the kind of weather that makes your expensive hiking jacket feel like a wet paper towel. For most of the year, the lake is frozen. But when the ice melts, human bones become visible along the shoreline and beneath the shallow water. Not one skeleton, not 10. Hundreds. Estimates suggest the remains may belong to somewhere between 600 and 800 people. For decades, researchers assumed they had all died during a single ancient disaster. That explanation made sense. A group of travelers climbs into the mountains, gets trapped by violent weather, and ends up becoming the world's most depressing tourist attraction. Then DNA testing arrived and calmly destroyed that theory. The dead did not all belong to the same population. They did not all die during the same journey. They did not even die in the same century. Some of the remains belonged to people with South Asian ancestry who likely died around the 9th century. Others belong to individuals genetically connected to the Eastern Mediterranean region, and they appear to have died roughly 1,000 years later. A smaller number showed links to Southeast Asia. So Roopkund was not the site of one tragedy. It was apparently a recurring appointment with death. Imagine arriving at a frozen lake in the Himalayas during the 18th or 19th century, seeing ancient human bones scattered everywhere, and deciding, "This looks safe. Let us continue." The location makes the mystery even stranger. Roopkund was not positioned beside a major city, military road, or famous trade route. It was a remote mountain lake requiring a dangerous climb through thin air, freezing temperatures, and unstable weather. There was no luxury resort waiting at the top, no warm restaurant, no gift shop selling shirts that said, "I survived Roopkund," which would have been awkward considering the evidence. Why did so many different groups travel there? One explanation connects the lake to a traditional pilgrimage route through the mountains. Local religious journeys may have brought travelers near the area over many centuries. That could explain the South Asian group, but it does not fully explain why people connected to the Mediterranean traveled to this isolated part of the Himalayas much later. Were they explorers, pilgrims, soldiers, wealthy travelers with the worst vacation planner in history? No one knows. The injuries found on some skeletons created another famous theory. Several skulls show rounded fractures caused by blows from above. Researchers propose that a group may have been caught in a violent hailstorm, with unusually large hailstones striking their heads and shoulders. A deadly hailstorm sounds ridiculous until you remember that normal hail can damage cars, roofs, and crops. Now imagine being trapped on an exposed mountain, with nowhere to hide while chunks of ice fall from the sky like frozen baseballs launched by an angry god. Should we turn back? No, the lake is just ahead. There are skeletons everywhere. That probably means we are close. This explanation may fit some of the older deaths, but it cannot automatically explain everybody at the site. The different dates suggest that separate groups reached Roopkund at different times and may have died for different reasons. Some may have been killed by weather, others may have died from cold, exhaustion, altitude sickness, accidents, or a combination of everything the Himalayas can throw at a human body. There is also no strong evidence that a single epidemic killed them. The bones do not reveal one universal cause of death, and the genetic diversity makes a single outbreak even less likely. Roopkund is one of those crazy historical facts where science solves the simple mystery and replaces it with a much worse one. Researchers once asked, what killed this group? Now they must ask, why did multiple unrelated groups from different parts of the world keep arriving at the same deadly lake across roughly 1,000 years? That actually happened. And it is a perfect example of weird history refusing to behave like a clean detective story. There is no single villain, no obvious disaster, and no final answer waiting in the last chapter. Roopkund may simply be a place where several human journeys ended badly, leaving their bones mixed together until modern science finally discovered that the victims had almost nothing in common except their destination and their terrible luck. So what have we learned from this cheerful little vacation through humanity's unfinished nightmares? At Sandby Borg, an entire community was slaughtered, the bodies were abandoned, and the killers somehow resisted the ancient human tradition of stealing everything that was not nailed down. The English sweating sickness arrived without warning, killed with terrifying speed, and disappeared before medicine could even figure out what question to ask. Göbekli Tepe proved that prehistoric people were building monumental structures long before civilization was supposedly ready for them. And at Roopkund Lake, hundreds of travelers from different centuries apparently reached the same frozen destination and received the exact same terrible customer service. These crazy historical facts remind us that history is not a completed book. It is a damaged police report written by people who died before finishing the final page. And that may be the real lesson of weird history. Humanity has always been brilliant, ambitious, confused, and occasionally spectacularly unlucky. For more stories so bizarre you need to remind yourself that actually happened, hit the subscribe button. Because the past is full of secrets, and unlike our ancestors, we are at least trying to read the instructions. Thanks for watching.